Awesome. Well, welcome back everyone to this meeting 7. Yeah, seems right. Air Toxic Science Advisory Committee. As you all remember, this is a continuation of the last two conversations. So we'll be kind of jumping right back into the discussion that we've had. So hopefully all of our format and templates that we've used will feel very familiar. It's been great to have such engaging conversation up to this point. As a reminder, particularly for anyone joining online, only panelists or advisory committee members will have the ability to speak. We are recording this meeting, which will be posted on the ATSAC website. We do have closed captioning enabled, so if it's helpful for your participation, please see the CC button or show captions on the bottom of your screen. You click that and it'll bring up closed captioning to help participation. And just as a reminder for our attendees, the chat is disabled and so is Q&A. So this really is a conversation of the ATSAC. There's other parts of the process where public comment will be included, but for today, you'll just be observing as an attendee. So with that, Holly, I think I'm just going to pass it right to you and we'll dive right in, folks.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. So today, we're just trying to get right into it from where we left off at our last meeting, which would be at document 5, those proposed groupings of toxic air contaminant document. We're also going to try to get through document 6 and document 7. Document 6 is on the screening PPRTVs, and document 7 are on those TRVs that are not yet finalized. They're still in draft form. And document 6 and 7 are a bit shorter than document 5. So we expect most of the discussion today, time-wise, to be on document 5. We also have 2 open-ended general questions after we get through the documents. And that would be a great place if you have any questions or comments left over from any of the stuff we've discussed at the past meetings or like the workbooks. That would be a great place to bring that up. So we'll have those towards the end, those 2 open-ended questions. So we will get right started on document 5 on the groupings. If we go to the next slide with the questions, I will read through these questions for document 5. These 2 are more open-ended in general. So there, do you have any feedback or concerns about how we plan to organize groups of chemicals and how we plan to account for their toxicity? And do you agree that these are the right compounds within each group? And our plan, since document 5 includes different subsections with different categories of groups, we were planning on scrolling through, sharing our screen, and kind of going through each section one at a time with you all so we can kind of walk through the document together. And so I wanted, before we pull that document up, I wanted to also highlight the third and last question that we have on this next slide. This is the one question here related to a specific subsection. So we'll scroll through and get to this. This was section 3.1. So question 3 is the World Health Organization has a 2024 set of toxic equivalency factors, TEFs, for dioxins and furans. DEQ is currently proposing to keep using the 2010 EPA TEFs as applied by WEHA. No other jurisdictions have adopted the new World Health Organization TEFs to DEQ's knowledge. Should DEQ continue to apply EPA's 2010 recommended TEFs as proposed, or consider proposing the 2024 World Health Organization TEFs instead? So this is the more technical question that we have when we get to section 3.1. So we'll put those in the chat, but wanted to read through them and so you have these in mind as we scroll through the document section by section. So we'll pull that document up and then open it up for discussion. Perfect. So this was the background section. And then we get into the next section. This first one here with the table, chemical groups that can be summed and compared directly to a TRV that applies to the group. So want to open it up here. Does anyone have any answers to those questions? Questions 1 and 2 related to this section of the document. I'll pause.
Thanks, Holly. And did we put the questions in the chat? So the questions around feedback or concerns, how we plan to organize the groups of chemicals to account for their toxicity and that they're the right compounds within each group. Yes, thank you, Dana. Susan?
I guess I just had a question first, about the process used to group chemicals by similarity. Does Oregon DEQ or OHA have your own process for grouping chemicals by similarity? Thinking something similar to, applying OECD guidance or defining similarity in a read across, for instance, or are you or do you rely on groupings that have been proposed through authoritative sources, and that's what this is? I just didn't know if you had a specific process that you go through in terms of defining similarity.
David?
Yeah, the second thing you said is correct. Like we haven't developed our own criteria for grouping. Like all of these proposals are similar to how other authoritative sources group things. California is especially, OEHA is actually really helpful. They have a lot of really explicit information about how they group things and which compounds are grouped with what. So in most cases we were following along with that. I don't think there's any cases where we where something we're proposing is something that we devised on our own.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Did you have thoughts on the grouping beyond the question, Susan?
I didn't have any concerns about the groupings.
Thank you. Let's go John Vandenberg and then John Boudreau.
Thank you very much. I guess I don't have any issue with the groupings that you've got here, but I wonder if there was a reason not to include the PFOS and PFOA compounds. Maybe that's somewhere else, but I would thought that would have been here. Could you, I mean, that's a huge issue here in North Carolina. I don't know if that's the case in Oregon, but it certainly is very, very pressing here. So do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, I would say the focus of this document is cases where the grouping has some kind of an effect on TRV application. And we totally recognize that PFAS are a group, that is obviously a class of chemical, but right now we're proposing that each member of that group has its own TRV. We haven't found a way to apply a single TRV to all PFAS or a relative potency factor approach for PFAS. So the reason they're not in this document is because even though they are a related group of chemicals, we're applying each member of the PFAS group that we have on our list has its own set of TRVs, as opposed to some kind of, adding them up and then adding them up and then applying a single TRV or something to the group.
Okay, I understand that. So thank you. That's very helpful.
And John, did you have other feedback though? John Vandenberg?
Not on this question, no.
Okay, great. John Boudreau?
Being very familiar with this particular chemical, yeah, the RELs would have been very similar if they, looking at them for each chemical, and you're pretty much going to be in actual use, you're going to be working with mixed isomers. So I completely agree with this grouping.
Great, thanks, John Boudreau. John Stanek or Daisy, any thoughts on the?
Yeah, I don't have any, disagreement. I agree with everything.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree as well. I mean, we've, for example, even on the trimethylbenzenes, I believe our assessment from, I don't know how long ago it's been, but I think our reference value also accounted for the same groups of trimethylbenzenes anyway. So.
Awesome. Thanks, John. John Boudreau?
Yeah, are we going to be walking through these one by one?
Is there well,
Yeah, we
David?
can. I was just gonna ask that question, whether you wanted me to scroll through the table on each row or I'm not sure what if you're looking at your own version or if you're only looking at the shared screen. So I'm happy to do either. Like, so yeah, if you have comments about others in the table, I can scroll through the table on individual rows.
Right, because the high level question is the same. Are these the right groupings across this entire table? But if there's particular groupings, John Boudreau, that you want to kind of open up dialogue with the group, that'd be great.
Okay, well, in general, I'm fine with the groupings that you've got. Just looking at the information, however, for toluene diisocyanate, where it says that TRVs are listed separately but identically for the two isomers. ATSDR does not distinguish between isomers, neither does AWIA. So that's the rels for TDI are the same for either isomer or mixed isomer. So just the language in that box might want to be cleaned up a little bit.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so you're just saying that OEHA is the same as ATSGR and that it's the same TRV for either isomer or mixed.
Correct.
Okay.
You got it, David? No.
Yep.
So it's just that, yeah, that second sentence. Was there anything else, John? Did you see any other kind of discrepancies or updates?
Nope, nothing.
Okay. For the rest of the team, I know we got high level, but was there any other groupings that you wanted to comment on, or are folks good to keep going? Or if there's, I don't know if there's a separate question around the compounds within each group. Holly?
Nope. Just wanted to see if anyone has any other comments on table 1 in this subsection 2, and then we'll move on to section 3. Okay.
Not seeing any hands. Yep.
Yeah, we can move on. We're always happy to go backwards too, if you think of anything. This section 3, this is where we have examples of toxicity equivalency factors and relative potency factors that we're proposing. And I think we should pause on the subsection 3.1 here. And this is related to that third question that's in the chat. So kind of more of a technical question. So I'll pause here and let you all pull that one up.
I can start this one. So I personally, I think, I will adopt the 2024 WHO TFs. I read the article. I think it reflects more curated database and also the user-based statistics. So scientifically, it's also better than the old one. But if you worry about whether other agency adopt this one, maybe can contact EPO or EHA to see whether or when they will adopt these values. To me, I think they have the confidence, they propose these changes, and some they don't, if a not so strong database, they actually prefer, they didn't do any changes. So that's my own opinion.
Yeah, thanks, Daisy. John Vandenberg?
I had a very similar reaction, as it wasn't clear to me that this rationale is very strong, just to say that it's not been adopted by others. Because when I looked at the manuscript that was done by Mike DeVito et al., I thought it was well done. It was thoughtful, and they did a comparison of the former 2005 WHO values, and you can see there's a little bit of a mix. Some of the values go up, some go down a bit. But I thought that in terms of bringing more information to the table, that manuscript, that publication, really provides a strong science basis for using the WHO. I think it's 2022, not 24, but it's a 24 publication. Okay. They went through workshops, they did systematic review, they brought in Bayesian approaches. I thought that was very well thought through and done. So I'm not sure that this is a really sufficient rationale not to use the newest science, which is what I think is represented there in the WHO document.
Awesome. Thanks. John Boudreau?
I'm going to take a bit of a contrarian attitude to this question. I will happily admit to not being a Bayesian statistics expert. And a lot of that manuscript has to deal with that. And I would want somebody who has specific expertise in that area to go back in and take their own independent look at this to see if it needs to be evaluated. And, that could be US EPA, that could be OEA, but I would like to see it be vetted, or, Oregon DEQ, you folks could put together your own special purpose panel on this, but I'd kind of like to see somebody from, a review group to look at that manuscript and make sure that, it's sufficient for use.
Right. Thanks, John. Susan, John Stanek, other thoughts? And I want to circle back around because it's important space to spend some time when there's different views. But Susan or John Stanek?
I guess I do agree that the manuscript itself, I thought it was, really well put together. I think it could create a wonderful new resource that pulls together a lot of information. But I guess I approach the question from a process standpoint and thinking about how we've kind of approached other data that comes in for consideration. And I guess I was leaning more towards John Boudreau's conclusion to, at this point, maintain using the EPA TEFs for two reasons. One, until this is reviewed and adopted through an authoritative source. And then secondarily, it seemed, I guess maybe it depends on the value, some go up, some go down, but it seemed overall the conclusion was that the prior values might be more protective.
Great. Thank you, Susan. John Stanek?
Yeah, I don't really have an opinion one way or another. I don't, I think Mike DeVito's back at EPA, so I don't know if this is part of a larger project for eventual EPA adopting it. But I have no insight into that either. It probably is worth, taking a further look at its applicability, I think.
Good. Thank you, John. So OHA and DQ, what are you hearing? Well, I know it's not a voting group, but it seems like 2 and 2 here by my math. But I guess, for ATSAC members hearing each other, does that change anything, or is there further? Sounds like there's kind of some support based on the quality of the manuscript and the work that was done to support WHO. There's some deeper dive potentially. Daisy, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, that's why I suggest maybe contact EPA or EHA to see what their stand. Because look at the manuscript, it's from someone from EPA, and in terms of Bayesian statistics, I think you can trust that they actually have an expert on the panel. I think they broke into three panels during the 2022 meetings, and each look at different experts. And even for us, we do risk assessment, we towards going to Bayesian. It's just like when you incorporate some pride, it's just better in my sense. I'm not expert, but my feeling, I look at the methodology, but I think they already have an expert in this panel. So I think if I see the other members' opinion, so maybe contact EPA or EHA, see what their, status. They must, it's a 2022, they must also, want to do something, right? So I think if they kind of, we are in the process to adopting, then you can just go ahead and adopt it. But if they said, okay, no, not sure, then maybe, you can like Susan said, more conservative way, so.
John Vandenberg?
I'm not an actual expert either in Bayesian statistics, but I do know many of the people who are involved in this, and I have great confidence in them. One possibility kind of along these lines would be not necessarily to go back to EPA, because I think in the current atmosphere that EPA is working, you're not likely to get anything from EPA that's very useful in a timely way. But there are people who are available, like Linda Birnbaum, who's absolutely an expert in the field here, and many of her studies were referenced in the WHO document. And she's done a number of different types of reviews. She's retired as the director of NIEHS. So she might be another person to turn to look at. And I guess one of the thoughts was maybe the state could pull together a group to just kind of review that approach, consider alternative approaches, and then make some recommendations besides having just us do it. Because from my point of view, I think it's quite well done. So I would go ahead with that. But again, I realize that there's, who else is adopting it? Nobody, but why wait is my point of view. So there you have it.
Thanks, John. So I guess Holly and David, do you have other questions, or is there background on kind of where or how you landed in terms of the proposed approach, or what's coming up for you all? Because it doesn't sound like we're not going to get unanimous kind of affirmation of the approach. But David?
No, I think we've heard what, I mean, I understand what everyone has said, and I understand the positions. This is kind of a vague memory. I have seen an email through some kind of national group of practitioners in risk assessment that someone from EPA was sort of re-looking at the Bayesian statistics to decide whether EPA should adopt, I think. I remember seeing an email like that. So if I can track that down and find out who that person was at EPA, or as others have said, maybe contact other authors on the paper to see what their thoughts are. But yeah, I think that we have enough. It sounds like we've received what the committee is able to deliver on this question.
Fair. Holly, anything to add?
No, those are my thoughts too. We have some homework to do now, but it was really great to hear everyone's thoughts, even if they weren't the same. So that's very valuable to us.
Right. So before just moving on, any last thoughts on this set of questions? For this last question, part one? Okay. Well, let's keep moving then.
Yeah. Maybe we should, stop here at 3.2. This section was on PAHs and using the benzo-A pyrene approach. I think we kind of talked about this a little bit in document 4 last time, but if there's anything else related to what we put here on PAHs, it'd be a good time to talk about it.
Yeah, we did talk about it last time. So if there's nothing new.
Not seeing any hands. Okay.
Perfect. So the next section is on inorganic toxic air contaminants and their associated compounds. Maybe we'll stop here on the metals section and see if there is anything people wanted to bring up.
I'm trying to figure out how to
Yeah.
adjust the screen so that the whole list can be on at once. I can't quite fit all of the bullets of metals at the same time, but here's the first block, I guess.
Yeah, we can start with,
A through L.
yeah, A through L. We'll start with A through L. And what's the question that you're asking of this?
I could give a little preface on it. It's written here in the introduction, but metals are metals. The difference here is these are chemicals where the toxic component is a metal, and it's often like a salt. It's inorganic and it's part of a salt, and then so it can form compounds with lots of other different things. But in each case, it is the metal that is the toxic component. And so it can be confusing for people who are trying to report to just know. So that's why you can't just, it's hard to just say aluminum, because in nature, in reality, like aluminum is not usually going to be just aluminum metal by itself. It's going to be oxidized and then compounded with something else in a salt. So that's why these are all kind of named the metal and compounds, because it's, the metallic form and or whatever it's in a compound with. So that's kind of and this is consistent with how most agencies do it. Like looking through, especially OEHA, I think all of the metals, they're listed as like the metal and compounds, and then they have a list somewhere of like these are not like an exclusive, not like a comprehensive list, but like many examples of individual metal compounds that would fit in that under that heading. And some of those compounds can be water soluble or not. And so there's also some groupings like that, like where that can make a difference in the toxicity, whether it's soluble or not.
So the question is still on that piece around, are these the right ways to group and organize these metals based on what you just described? Okay.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
thoughts on, maybe we'll start with what you can see A through L. Any thoughts on those, the kind of proposed approaches? John Boudreau?
Yeah, just is there any thought to making those inorganic compounds? Because that was one thing at AWEA where it was always kind of a question, is what happens if you have, an organometallic compound? Is that going to be substantially different from what you're seeing, with all the inorganic metal compounds?
I should say, like we did, I think we mean inorganic compounds, and so we probably should write that. I think in all of these cases, the examples that we have in each kind of grouping of metals, all the examples are inorganic compounds. So we could be more clear about that for sure.
Anything to add, John Boudreau, hearing that?
Nope, that sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Daisy?
Yeah, I actually have a question on this. So I saw you sometimes adopt ATSDR, and then you sometimes adopt OEHA. So it's like some compound like both have different rules, and then like which one you choose. I saw you said that it's like some are change from existing rules, some are not change, and you propose like use OEHA's approach. So it's like there's any case, there's like you can find both OEHA and ATSDR, but they use a different approach.
Yeah, we usually went. Both agencies, both ATSDR and OEHA, have sometimes like changed whether especially, and the changes are most frequent between like soluble and insoluble, like making the determinations whether to group everything together like a metal compound, or to separate the soluble from the insoluble. And sometimes, and they both shift sometimes as they update their documents. And so we kind of went with the same way that we do with selecting a TRV, like who kind of had the most recent science, or the most who was looking at the most recent studies on it, to make our decision about, so sometimes we would change because a newer ATSDR document like grouped the metals in a different way, or separated like Chrome 3 into soluble and insoluble. I can't remember for sure which one was which, but it was case by case, basically, depending on who had the more recent publication or the most recent look at it.
Maybe, also you said it's not like a whole group. So maybe here, to me, it's not clear. Maybe you can add, like I say, okay, for this compound, this group of compounds, we did not choose the ATSDR because of some, indication here, or I assume you indicate this in the table, right? Worksheet.
Yeah, it is in the workbooks, and yes, it is in the workbooks. For several of the acute values, we also made adjustments to an ATSDR intermediate MRL, and in those cases, they also are in document 4 that we talked about last week, where we wrote about like what the adjustments were.
Okay, then I think that's good enough. So you already put in the document file. So I was trying to, go back and look at the document for this morning. It was like, I'm not sure, yeah. But that's good, yeah. I don't have any other questions.
But just some clarity around how you got to where you got. Okay. Thanks, Stacy.
And I do really appreciate the idea to be explicit about inorganic compounds, because that is, and for mercury, for example, that's a really important difference, whether it's an organic mercury versus an inorganic mercury.
Thank you, John Vandenberg.
So I'm glad you brought up mercury, because that's what I was just looking at. Is I'm not seeing the organic mercury anywhere. Is that in the non-cancer?
I wasn't able to find any inhalation tox values for organic mercury. Like organic mercury comes up a lot with fish, like
Sure.
fish consumption, and that's the form that builds up in fish tissue.
Right.
So I've seen it there. I'm not sure I'm also not sure like how common like air sources to air are for organic mercury compounds.
Yeah,
I think.
But across the board, if you change every one of these to be mercury and inorganic compounds, that's what you're thinking of doing. Is that correct? So you're narrowing it down to just the inorganic forms.
That is what I was thinking. Yeah, based on conversations so far here.
I just, again, mercury may be a special case because it's so important for water quality, but I don't know if that's always the case across all these other compounds. Like lead, is it just inorganic lead? I don't know. I'm sorry to say I don't know. So I don't have any real issue with it. I'm just trying to see, and I guess John Boudreaux raised the point that these all seem to be inorganic forms that we're talking about here. But are there organic forms that are also important that as an air toxic? And that's a question I don't have the answer to. So, but it sounds like for mercury, you've considered that. And that was the one that I wanted to make sure about. So wow. I don't have any other comment.
Thanks, John Vandenberg. John Boudreaux?
Just that you're not really likely. I've never heard of a air risk assessment for hotspots in California that had any organic mercury issues.
Is there, because I think John Vandenberg, you're also asked, are there any of these others that have an organic air inhalation source? Like David, is mercury an example that cuts across all the other compounds here?
I think mercury is the most prominent one, but I just don't know about the others.
Yeah, okay.
So, your organization makes sense. It's just a question mark whether there's something out there that we're not thinking about. And I guess if that's the case, you could revisit it, but otherwise what you've got here makes good sense to me.
Holly, you gotta come off mute.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking we'll do our homework before renaming all of them and think it through. So we appreciate it.
David,
Yeah.
anything?
Well,
Yes.
I would just add too that I do know that the TRVs that we have are based on studies with inorganic compounds. Like none of the inhalation TRVs that we have for these groups of metals were done using organic forms of the compound. So that's part of the issue too. So the part of the question is whether or not organic metals are emitted to the environment, to the air. And then the separate question is, do we have toxicity values that would actually be appropriate for inhalation of organic metals? And I would say that right now, I don't know of any of our TRVs for metals and compounds where the test compound was an organic metal compound.
Well, Holly, what I heard you say is that might be just a double check homework before you kind of label all these as inorganic. It's just to double check that there's not studies or existing models that could be used for organic inhalation.
Yeah, we'll definitely check all of those.
Okay. Susan, John Stanek, any other thoughts on this ordering? Or on the conversation we just had? Yeah, John Stanek.
No, like we're taking a similar approach. We're currently working on cobalt redo on that due to having some new particle modeling software. But yeah, we're doing similar thing with vanadium by using compounds. I am on a mercury salts team, and as far as we've gotten, there is some. I don't know if it will cover. Like it has the assessment plan and the literature review is posted on IRIS. I believe. I don't know if that would be a good resource to try and figure out if there's a summary of what's been looked at or what studies are available regarding inhalation or whatever.
Right. Susan?
No, I don't have any additional comments.
Thank you. Any other follow-up, David, Holly, on this grouping? I know we didn't, I guess we did scroll all the way down to the vanadium. Any other questions from your end?
No, that was helpful though.
Okay, should we move into 4.2? Okay,
Sure. This is similar questions, but in this case, they're inorganic ions, but they're not metals. So, and cyanide is kind of weird because you could say it is always organic because there is a carbon in it, but we're thinking in this instance, we're thinking of it more like a salt. So, or an ionic form of cyanide, yeah.
thoughts, team?
And
Yeah,
I'll just say too that fluoride was really complicated. So, for what it's worth.
For what it's worth. John Boudreau, jump in.
I'm fine with the approach.
Okay, thank you, John. Are there either specific or high-level feedback on the approach? John Vandenberg?
Just to reinforce that fluoride is very complicated. Again, there's been this debate about fluoride in water, but I don't know how that affects as an air toxic. So I think what you've got is reasonable from my point of view.
Thanks, John. Daisy?
Yeah, I actually have a question about it. I didn't see your sulfur fluoride on your list. So Oregon don't have a sulfur fluoride? California, we have, it's a gas, it's very important for fumigation. And I think because of the ban of methyl bromide, a lot of import, like or fruits export, they all use like sulfur as like fumigants.
Yeah, I will check. I
Yeah.
think that we do have that, but it is in a separate line. It's not grouped, I think, with
Oh, really? I checked
fluoride.
your table. I couldn't find because I work on sulfur fluoride. I did come up some like reference value back 5 years ago. Yeah, I think I really received like Minnesota, the other ask like New Jersey. They all ask. I feel like they all use all value because they constantly contact me. I didn't see in your Excel sheet. So
Okay,
We can look.
we'll
Yeah.
look it up. Yeah.
yeah. If I can send you my document if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. And we'll check.
Would that be a come back to it then? So Daisy, you'll send,
Yeah. I send my document to you guys. That's why I recently received someone from Minnesota. They asked if our values are final, and I know like we've been helping New Jersey long time with the sulfur fraud. They change their new staff member and continue like chat with us, and then there's another new one and they chat with us. So
and then
I sent you sulfur fraud document.
okay.
Okay.
And then JR, yes, I think that's the answer. Daisy, you see in the chat, sulfuryl fluoride, right?
Yeah, sulfur fluoride. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a gas. At least in California, because a lot of places they fumigate the house with termite and the bed bugs, so use a lot. I think now a lot Southern California some complaint is because some coffee or whatever import warehouse they kind of have to use a lot, and then actually the concentration is quite high in the air. So I don't know, Oregon, it could be, it's not your priority.
Bujo?
Yeah, or it might not apply because I mean, like in California, sulfuryl fluoride for fumigation is totally under DPR's purview. But for things like spice fumigation or coffee beans or anything like that, then it becomes a hotspots use, and hotspots would apply to it. So it's kind of, I guess, gets down to the risk management structure that you folks got in Oregon as to whether you're going to wind up needing to do a TRV for it or not.
DPR was pesticide department and
Yeah, it's my Department of Pesticide Regulation. So that's why I told you guys, we are working on the air monitoring network. We have like a 40 pesticide. It's not, OEHA didn't do that. California ARB didn't do that because it's a pesticide. So we're actually monitoring all the pesticide in the air around the agriculture area. So, but we are updating. We have the screening level similar as your TRV. We have like acute, subchronic, chronic. But we are working on updating all these 40 pesticide with the new methodology. We adopt the RGDR, actual thoracic equals 1, all the new science. And so we are different from DEQ, what you guys do. We just use the POD from either EPA or like our own risk characterization document, and then we apply our own methods. So we just take their POD and then completely, use our own RFC methods. So we are in the processing update. We finish all the calculations, but we need to write up the document. So I don't know, government is always kind of slow. So, to me, it's like 2 weeks to work. But, we don't know until because they have to review all those things. So we don't know. But it's like a 40 pesticides, just to focus on pesticide. Yeah. we are updating all like a three, values, acute, subchronic, chronic. Our acute the same as DQ is 24 hours. Our acute also 24 hours. Yeah.
And-
But
and
I
Daisy-
will keep you guys updated when we finish our document. So, you can do, like it or not.
So Daisy, the draft value that you're working on, it's different enough in toxicity from like the fluoride and compounds kind of
For
TRV would
the-
not be protective or
For the
for this.
sulfate chloride, it's a risk assessment document. So it's I review the completely database. I don't think that there's any new database for sulfate fluoride. And, so it's, it's finalized. It's reviewed by, internal, external, and or you have EPA. So it's all completely, it's not like a draft. Our IFC is finalized. I don't think that there's any study, all the study is a poison gas have to be done by registrar. I don't think that academia, anyone wants to do that. Yeah. So for sulfur, we are finalized. The values are finalized, but it's a range. We give a range instead of a particular value.
That's really helpful to know. I definitely would want to take a
For
look
other
at those.
tests, I keep you guys updated when we
Yeah.
finalize our airman, we call air monitoring network. I
Mhm.
think that we are the only, DPR, the only agency do the pesticides in the air. I don't see any other, state or federal level monitoring pesticide in the air. We have a monitoring station across California. So that's why the old value was like 2011. And but at that time was like, the methods was not consistent. That's why we updated the value. We starting, I think, last year. So,
Okay.
but, I'm one of the, person work on these values. So,
Thank you, Daisy. You'll follow up then with OHA. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other thoughts on this section, non-metal inorganic ions?
All right.
Let's see, yep, just keep going. Silica.
Silica. Do you want to talk about this one, Holly?
Sure. Yeah. So this is the last subsection of this document. And you can see we took a look at a couple different documents from ATSDR was a big one, their tox profile from 2019. And then we also took a look at some Texas TCEQ documents as they had different groupings for silica. And we used a combination of those documents and how they were grouping things to propose some groups, two main groups for silica, which you can see here in 5.1 and 5.2, which was largely driven by what we found in the ATSDR tox profile. So wanted to know what you all thought about this, and if you had any feedback on silica for us.
Yeah, Susan.
I just wanted to start by saying I do support the approach that you've taken for crystalline and non-crystalline forms, and the consideration of for smaller size particles, crystalline particles, of 4 microns or less for crystalline respirable forms. So, so I support your approach as it's laid out here.
Thank you, Susan. Other folks, comment, feedback, support. John Boudreau.
I'm good with the approach as outlined.
Thank you, John. Daisy.
yeah, me too. I think it's good to break down. I actually, did some research before. I think it's a good break, you know, the two group.
Good. Thank you, Daisy. John Vandenberg?
The only question I have is about this 4 microns or less. So if you have a source that is emitting silica, the crystalline form, that happens to be a little bit larger than 4 microns, does that mean it is not covered by this? Something between 4 and 10 microns, for example, that's respirable, but above 4. So what happens if it's got a size range of, mass median diameter or whatever of 8? What happens?
Yeah, this was something we were discussing and struggling with as I was reading through these documents. And the size fraction was really prominent that these applied in the Texas document to that size range of under 4. So that's why we were proposing to use that size range and wanted to get some feedback on that. But that was really based off of a note that we found within the Texas documentation on this value.
Yeah, because I would think that, respirable is in the title there, but 4 microns, sorry, the 4 microns is appropriate at 4, but it could also be appropriate a little bit higher than that, seems to me, as also being respirable. So I think you could just call it respirable and not have this 4 micron cutoff.
Okay.
Something to consider. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, John. So I wonder, are there other, Susan and then John Boudreau? Susan?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. As long as you are not considering particles that are smaller than 10 microns, I guess that was my point. Using the 10 microns as a cutoff.
Yeah.
And so I might have misinterpreted the way it was written.
Okay.
Thanks, Susan. John Boudreau?
Yeah, the 4 micron cutoff for the crystalline silica goes back to the studies that the for example, the OERLs and probably TCEQ numbers are based on, and I have to refresh exactly why they made it like that, but it really comes down to that the original data that those numbers are based on. So.
But that would not suggest that it's not appropriate for a somewhat larger particle that's still respirable. Is that right?
It's kind of interesting.
I mean, I understand the point is the data is based on 4 and less.
Yeah.
But you may have a mix of exposure sizes and it could be bigger. So I would say respirable is more of an appropriate cutoff than a 10 than 4 to me. But I understand the point. That's where it came from, as the study was done at 4. But I would think it would be relevant for somewhat larger stars as well.
John Boudreau, do you have reflections on that?
No, just no.
Well, other thoughts, because so for OHA, you're landing at 4 based on the science. John, you're arguing that it could be under 10 because it's still respirable up until 10. Mike?
That's right.
Okay. David, you look like you're going to jump in.
I was just going to ask for like a clarification of the recommendation, I guess, is what I was looking for. So is the recommendation then that we make the crystalline silica TRV applicable to particles that are 10 microns or less, and rather than 4 or less?
That's what I would suggest.
John Vandenberg, John Boudreau.
All I could say is AWEA went with the same cutoff as TCEQ did, which is surprising. Doesn't often happen, and it's to go back into why AWEA did it. I would have to go back and dive deeply into the document.
We can look at that.
Yeah.
I guess for Daisy, Susan, John, Stanek, any thoughts on this comment? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just doing a quick search and like the Wisconsin Health Services, yeah, for some reason they have crystal and silica as they refer to as less than 4 as well for respirable. So I don't know. I don't have any insight. I was just seeing if there was some, generic definition, with inhalable versus respirable versus where they go, if that was a reason for the cutoffs. Might be worth, a little bit more search into that.
Okay.
But other places have it as 4 also. So I was just curious.
Access is just leading the way here, I guess. Daisy, any thoughts?
I have to dig into some because I think I see somewhere, but I didn't dig deep enough. To me, it's like there's I think a lot of people use a computation fluid dynamic model, and do have a distribution difference between like a 5 micron less versus 10 micron. So I'm not really sure. I can't help it much here, but I need to do more research.
I do know that in like particulate inhalation is like toxicology is like in some ways like a whole other thing. But I like with PM 2.5, for instance, there's a difference. There's a reason why PM 2.5 is regulated more stringently than PM 10.
Yeah.
By the in the NACS, the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. So I know that there is like a difference in is those smaller particles. I think they're talking about those particles that are small enough to get like past alveoli, like all the way into alveoli, as compared to the stuff that's bigger and gets kind of stuck further up in the nose and bronchioles and stuff.
Yeah, I look into more, and if I have some comments, I send to you guys.
Thank you.
John Stanek?
Yeah, I just found a paper written by a colleague, Jim Brown, who's particle guy. He has a paper, he has a definition of 50% penetration for thoracic as being 10, respirable fraction, which is unciliated airways, of being 4. So that might be, then he goes on to talk about the industrial hygienist values, et cetera. So it's probably something like that.
Okay, thank you. I'll dig into that.
Like a definition type thing somewhere.
Yeah.
Other thoughts, Holly, David, do you all have what you need? So it sounds like there's obviously there's alignment around 4 because that's consistent and people are referencing it, but there's some more work you can do to see if that's the right number to land on, or if it could be higher to be respirable. Is that
Yeah.
accurate?
Yeah. We'll do some digging. Thanks, John, for that paper in the chat. I'll read that.
I'm the particle guy. I love it. Okay. Any other thoughts on either the conversation we just had or on the others? Did you go to group 2 already with the silica amorphous or?
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So if there's anything else on silica or the rest of this document that you wanted to bring up before we move on?
No, it's just that they're on the group 2, you've got 10 microns or less. So
Right.
it's a bit murky. I think it's worth looking into.
Okay. Yeah, that definitely struck us when we were seeing that used by Texas and California.
Any other thoughts on the 5.2 group 2? All right.
Okay.
So let's see. Do you want to keep going? Do you want to take a break? Can you preview? So document 6, there's only 2 questions, right? Should we go through and then take a break and before 7?
Yeah, either way is fine with me. Document 6 and 7 are both shorter, so I think these will take a little bit less time.
Okay. Well, let's do document 6. If you want to introduce those, that's the PPR TVs as authoritative source.
Yep, we can pull that up. Look at the questions together. Perfect. So this is document 6, proposed TRVs using screening PPR TVs as the authoritative source. And the next slide has our 2 questions. And these are pretty general. What feedback or concerns do you have related to this document? And then the second question is the science behind these PPR-TV screening values sufficiently robust to use for our air quality programs, including regulatory applications when no other toxicity information is available. I'll pause there and we can open it up, see what you all think.
Yeah, Daisy. Oh, John, actually, you came on, I think, first. Sorry.
And I'm just not recalling what year these different PPR TVs were done. I guess if I clicked on them, I could tell. Is that all right? Let's see.
Let me look. So they started developing these screening PPR
2023.
TVs in
Yeah.
2008. That's when they started. And it looks like I do not have the years in table 1, but we can click on them and the years should be in
You
our
have the links
workbooks.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They should be right on the cover page of the links.
Yeah, it is. I guess that I'm quite familiar with this, and I would say that and I know John Stanek, you've been reviewing them as well. The more recent ones in particular, I thought were very well done because of the way the peer review was done, and most of those were probably from 2010 and later, maybe some are a little bit earlier than that. But if they're fairly recent, I think that they're well done in terms of the state of the science. Now, these all have less certainty than the other values, and in your setting of TRVs, you don't really reflect that. Is that right? In terms of there's no flag saying there's more or less certainty about some of these. Is that correct? Yeah.
Right. Right. We know where they're from, but they're kind of all like, here's our list of TRVs on the same playing field.
Well, maybe I'll take a quick look and just see what the dates on these things are, because that does.
Okay.
I think that the very earliest days of the PPR TV program, I was less confident in those than I have been since I was much more familiar with it later
Okay.
in years.
And so you're saying some of the more recent ones, it was the expert panels that you're saying there's
Yeah,
like a part of the
they went through
process?
peer review. They went through
Yeah.
peer review. They went through a peer review, and then there was a requirement to go through and address the peer reviewer comments.
Mm.
And again, no longer being an EPA, in the first stage of this program, there was a more cavalier attitude towards peer review comments than there was a more significant review and necessary revisions based on peer review comments. So the peer review process was much more robust
Okay.
in later years than the first years. I don't know, John Stanek, do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, sometime they switch to having like even internal, like 2 or 3 people internal letter review from fellow scientists, usually our group or others. And then they would resolve those in meetings and then go to external peer review and then address that. So it has been not like added steps, just probably added scrutiny and like a little more discussion around, science issues and making sure, we're following similar processes. And now even they've increased that they're starting to add systematic review, et cetera. So all kind of newer stuff is, I guess, more state of the art as far as risk assessment goes. But it's been going on for quite a number of years, the way they've restructured it.
So maybe John Vandenberg, as you're looking at the dates and John Stanek, just on that reflection, I know John Vandenberg, you said just 2010 as maybe a placeholder. Is that if there's a year, sounds like if there's a specific time frame where that more kind of intentional approach can be a cutoff. Maybe that's where you start trusting the process and the peer review and the science as a baseline.
Oh, and as I look at this list, every one of those are more recent than 2010. So I would say that I'm comfortable with all of the ones that are here on this list.
Okay, thanks, John. Daisy?
Yeah, I just want to say I agree. I think if EPA have a value, and then they will just rotate out. There's no PPRTV. I think my understanding is the PPRTV is most of us like in between. If they have found other value, they just out of this list. And for the screening PPRTV. I know, like last time I listened to a talk from EPA, they use a lot of NAM as well. So to me, I think it's better have value than no value. That's always my take. If you don't have any value, people don't know. It's better to update it later. It's better to have something than nothing. Yeah, I agree.
And let me correct what I said. I see a couple of these are from 2007, 2009. I'm comfortable with those as well. Okay.
Thanks, John.
Because they reflected the 2005 cancer guidelines. And, again, I think I'm comfortable with all of these. It was the ones from the very early years that there was some issues with, and that's not this set of chemicals at all.
Holly?
That's helpful.
Okay. Susan, John Boudreau, so these kind of high-level questions around any feedback or concerns around using the kind of peer review as authoritative source, and sounds like folks are gravitating to trusting the science based on the process, but John Boudreau?
Likewise, I'm good with the approach.
Okay. Susan?
I'm good with the approach. I only had a comment, I guess, similar to John Vandenberg's, just about the flagging, of high uncertainty values. And, there is no other value or data available for these. And some of these values have been around for a while, and that hasn't changed. But it goes back to one of my early questions when we started this, just about the process moving forward, and for values that I have high uncertainty like this, is there I guess a way to flag these that would note that if additional available data became available, it would be considered, and just I guess recognizing in a way that because of the way that they were derived as screening PPRTVs, they might be serving as a placeholder until further data is available.
Yeah, then, Holly, did you have a question?
No, I just want to say thanks for that. I wrote down some of that wording, and I think I'll definitely be thinking about that as we display these values and think about the notes we put next to them. I'll definitely be thinking about that.
Thanks. And then Susan, I guess, is that your answer to question two? I mean, is it just really making a notation in terms of the science being sufficiently robust to using as part of a regulatory application when there's not another kind of authoritative source or reference value? I mean, Daisy, you were better to have something than not have anything, but Susan, how would you say anything else about your comment based on that second question?
No. I mean, I don't question the process. These are peer-reviewed values, but there's a lot of information in this document about the uncertainty associated with them, and I don't know if that's reflected as these get moved forward.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you. We'll definitely think about what notes go next to them, and then we'll definitely, these documents that we've prepared for you, including this one with the kind of talking about the uncertainty, definitely move forward in the rulemaking process with the values and some sort of a kind of supplemental document. So we'll make sure that we package that with context.
Great, thank you. So given what you just said, Holly, and what folks have responded, any other further thoughts on I guess particularly, it sounds like, folks have gravitated around number one. Any other thoughts on question two? Are you good with the approach that we've landed on?
I am. It's John Vandenberg.
Thanks,
The
John.
one chemical here of this group that comes to mind for me is hexane, because there's so much exposure to hexane through petrochemicals, gasoline, and so forth. So that would be the one to look at closely to see if there's any other authoritative source anywhere. Maybe you already done that, but that's the one that kind of is a little bit older. Let me see when that one is done.
Okay, so follow up for hexane. Thank you,
Yeah,
John.
that's a 2009 PPRTV, which again, I think it's okay, but I'm surprised there's not something better to use than a PPRTV for that, but I don't know. So there's a lot of exposure to hexane.
Yeah, David?
I was going to mention that for non-cancer, there's a lot of options for a lot of authoritative sources have a lot more solid values for non-cancer effects of hexane. It's just the cancer effect that for which it was hard to find anything.
Thanks for that. John Vandenberg?
So is the cancer TRV is 5 micrograms per cubic meter. Somewhere here we can find the non-cancer, is that right?
Not in this document because that one but it is in like workbook 2 or workbook 1. You could see what the
Okay. So
what the
again,
values are for it.
when I pull up workbook 1, I see hexane is 700 micrograms per cubic meter from the ATSAC Advisory Committee back in 2018. So I guess we talked about it then. So it's the cancer that's going to drive any limits here. So okay, so I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any other colleagues? Did you have some?
No, I just got distracted by the workbook. I was looking at saying all the numbers, but I'll look at that later.
No trouble. Well, before we pause, just I guess, and move into the next section, maybe take a break. Is there any final thoughts or reflections or comments from what we've already talked about today?
All I would say is it sure is nice to have 2 screens to look at, because I get distracted as well, like Holly says, I've got a second screen, but I go back and forth looking at 2 things, so it does
I
help.
know. Yeah, me too. There are so many documents up
Yeah,
at one
especially
time.
when
Yeah, it's a good use of a virtual meeting too, to have all my things.
it's all in front of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot of printed paper in person, for sure, big binder. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands or final thoughts on the sections that we've just walked through. Okay. I feel my stomach rumbling a little bit, so maybe that's my excuse to move us into a break. Our West Coast folks at 12:13. Folks good with 20 minutes, and then when we come back, we'll move into document 7, and then we'll close with general questions and some next steps. Okay. Well, why don't we take it's 12:13. Why don't we take 22? We'll take a nice leisurely 22 minutes and come back at 12:35. Does that work for folks? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So we'll see you in 22 minutes, 12:35. Thanks, Al.
Okay. I think we're all back from break, I think. I don't want to exclude anybody by starting too early, but okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up. Perfect. And Dana already has document 7 pulled up, so I can kind of get started with the spiel. So document 7, this is the one that's called proposed TRVs not yet finalized by authoritative sources. And this is another shorter document compared to some of the other ones. And the questions on the next slide, these questions are, do you have any feedback or concerns about DEQ proposing to use the TRVs listed in this document, table 1, that are not yet finalized by authoritative sources? And question 2, would you propose an alternative in the case of any or all of these toxic air contaminants? And we've discussed a few of these sentences that are in this document already as we talked through some of the other documents. And I'll just point out, I think it's the 3rd paragraph on here. There's some key cutoff dates that are signaled that we previously talked about. So everything was checked. Every single TRV authoritative source information, the cutoff was August 8th, 2024. And that included TRV information that was not yet finalized by authoritative sources. And then we checked this table 1 in this document of those draft TRVs on December 2nd of 2024. So that was right as we were wrapping up everything to send to you all for your review. So we had to have these cutoff dates to kind of move forward and package these materials to send out. And then we sent this document out on January 15th. However, I do know, like one of these, for example, in this table 1 isoprene from Cal EPA is now final. So there may be others, but you'll see that most of the ones in this table are from ATSDR. There's just one draft value from California on here. And so we had to have a cutoff date for this meeting, but moving forward, we plan to closely monitor any updates that come out from authoritative sources, especially things on this list. We'll evaluate them on a case-by-case basis as we see them. And it's potentially, we might want to run something by you as it progresses into draft or becomes final throughout the rest of the rulemaking process. So I just wanted to highlight those dates again. But I'll stop talking, I'll pause, put these questions in the chat, and would love to hear your feedback on document 7.
Thanks, Holly. Sorry, I lost track of time there. That was a nice little conversation in the hallway. But thank you for getting us back started. So let's jump back in. So feedback, concerns about John Vandenberg?
I see almost all of these except for one of them, isoprene, which you just mentioned, are from ATSDR. And it appears as though the public comment period for all of them has closed. I just tried to see if I could find the public comments on Acrolean as an example, and I can't figure out how to get access to that. Do you know if the public comments are available? I mean, after they've closed, I don't know if they hold them for a while, but it might be useful just to do a quick skim of the public comments and see if there's anything particularly notable that comes in from that process. That would be my only comment. I think it's reasonable to use these because I don't think the values typically change very much, although they can. So you may get some insights on that from ATSDR themselves as to whether the public comments were, trivial. I don't want to say trivial, or were potentially going to affect the development of their values. That's my other comment. Otherwise, it seems very reasonable to me.
Yeah, thank you.
Has that been part of your process, Holly, David? Like, so for some of these that were like released like August 2023 draft public comment released or closed in November 2023, like, have you had a chance to review any of the comments that came in that would inform this question?
I haven't
Okay.
reviewed them.
Yeah, we were more just tracking at what stages they were in the process, but we'll definitely try to see what documents are available, like John said, and take a look.
Good. Thanks, John. Your thoughts? Yeah, Daisy?
Yeah, I think we discussed this before. So to me, it's just in your Excel sheet, just put a column, say, the dates, update dates. So whenever it's finalized, you can just, replace the dates, the last update dates, then further the other, in future, you don't need to revisit. Yeah, whenever it come on, you just check. Most agency announce, like EPA, we constantly subscribe their email link. So they announce when there's something come.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Daisy. And I guess Daisy, did you have concerns over using the values that were proposed prior to public comment?
No, I actually don't have most time, they already gone through the internal review. So these values, and if it's actually, I like ATSDR, they very systematically review all the literature. So yeah, I have no problem.
Thank you. John Boudreau?
In general, I have no problem with this. I've got a question about that I hadn't really thought of before, between the preferential use of ATSDR acute derived TRVs over AWEA derived. And understand that the basis is AWEA works with a 1 hour acute rel, while the ATSDR number is 24 hours. The exception to the rule, in a way, is kind of sensory irritation, because AWEA acute rel, you would use the same if AWEA had both a 1 hour and a 24 hour, and something like acrolein, for example, where the acute rel is based on sensory irritation, the number would be the same. So has there any, I mean, and I'm assuming that the preferentiality is in rule. Have you ever considered making that caveat,
I don't think that the rule is not that specific. It's so the rule just says what the authoritative sources are, and it's been I think it's been internal guidance and that like internal guidance that we've been using to select between them. So so there wouldn't actually need to be a rule change to do what you're talking about. And there are cases where we've deviated from kind of like the default algorithm to choose an OEHA value over ATSDR.
Okay, so then when I go to the proposed TRV update and selection process for ATSAC review, and you get down to the acute TRV update and selection proposal, and it shows order of authoritative scientific agencies for acute non-cancer TRVs. Order of preference then is not set in stone.
Correct. That's
Right.
not that's not in rule. I mean,
Right.
the only part that's in rule is that these authoritative sources are authoritative sources, but like that order is not in rule.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we did have an updates document after that document you just mentioned, after we met with you all at ATSAC meeting 2. And we clarified that would just be a screening step, that order of preference for the TRVs, and that we had a preferred list of TRV attributes that we'd consider for each one. So it was kind of a case-by-case basis, like looking at each one and choosing which one matched the attributes the best.
Okay.
Any concerns, John, in there, or just clarification?
Just clarification.
Okay, thank you. Daisy?
Yeah, I actually want to follow up with John's question. I always try to review the document full. Because in case I assume, when you choose the acute TRV, you go to ATSDR first, right? If they have an acute, their acute is 1 to 14 days. And then if they don't have acute, you kind of go to OEHA's 1 hour, use, duration adjustment. And then, I think I see that your documents 2.1 is like, oh, like duration, then 2.2 is like ATSDR's intermediate MIL. So you do have some kind of hierarchy in selection, right?
Yes, yeah, we did have one that was we did have like an algorithm that we used to like go through, but that algorithm's not in rule, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I
So-
think maybe, just like, we also set up because we kind of have some, tier approach. Because, first, ATSDR's acute, of course, it's like a feature 24 hours. So, they have the first priority. Then when you don't have one, I think the next more close the POD, yes, it is, or you have 1 hour, 1 hour IEL. That's more closer than the ATSDR's intermediate, right? Because you don't use TCEQs, they have more aligned with your team, but you don't consider as authoritative sources. So to me, I think, it's kind of, you do have some kind of hierarchy there. And, this kind of, this did not really, very clearly specify in the document form. So I was trying to go back and read, try to figure out, but your arrangement did feel appears like you have some kind of hierarchy in your document, like 2.1, it's like, and 2.2 is like an intermediate and get rid of the weekly adjustment. So
Thanks, Stacy. Any other feedback, Susan, John Stanek, around this chart and proposal for the unfinalized, I don't know if that's a word, the not yet finalized values? I guess for Holly, David, so the second question around alternative, I haven't heard that, but do you want to reframe it or just ask it again?
Yep, that was if anyone had any issues
Okay,
with any of the other values, if there was an alternative to propose.
okay, thank you. Good.
I'm good.
I'm gonna, yeah, interpret this, the current silence as good to go. Okay. John Boudreau?
Sorry, clicked on that by accident. No, I'm good to go.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. Should we move? So we're moving into general questions. Is that where we're at?
Yep.
Wow, okay.
So this was kind of a catch-all, wanting to end on this after we went through so many documents and workbooks and had so many conversations. So we can go to the next slide and take a look at the 2 questions, and feel free to add in any other information. If you went back and looked at document 4 more or the workbooks, feel free to bring that up now in this section. But the questions we wrote out here is question number 1, did you find any errors or have feedback or concerns about the content in any of the ATSAC review materials? And this can be in addition, like we heard, and we will record everything that you've brought up thus far. So don't feel like you have to repeat everything you brought up and found already and shared. So in addition to that, was there anything else that you found? And then question number 2, do you have any feedback or concerns about a specific toxic air contaminant TRV that we've not yet discussed or flagged anywhere else?
Well, John, I think you previewed that you were going to raise something from last time at the beginning, so thanks for your patience. Why don't you start us off?
Okay, looking at workbook 1, and there's a column all the way over to the right-hand side of the workbook, reason for change. And there's a bunch of entries that say more recent science. And that I would have an issue with, because really it should be more recent evaluation. And the reason I say that is if you have one agency has develops a health value in 2019, another one develops it in 2020. For the most part, there's not going to be a big difference in risk assessment methodology between those two evaluations. Probably not even necessarily brand new data. I mean, it could be, but more likely than not, it's just that it's when that agency happened to get around to doing that number, especially when it's a de novo. It's not a reevaluation. It's just, okay, this is when this chemical has now come up in the queue and we're going to do it. So I would say that more recent evaluation is more appropriate in that column. And, it may sound like a small, point, but somebody looks at this workbook 5 years down the line and says, aha, well, the science was better for that particular agency's evaluation because it's more recent, and not necessarily.
I wanted to just raise, it's a great point, and I think that what we need here really is we need like a key for those different reasons for change, because we talked about this internally. There is a distinction between, there's places where we say more recent science and when we say more recent publication date. And the difference between those is more recent science means that the critical study that the value is based on is more recent. And then more recent publication means that's more like what you're talking about, like more recent evaluation. Like that was the last time that the agency reviewed the data and made an update. And so I was going to try to find an example of that. I think probably tab 4 in workbook 1 has the most examples and places where you can, let's see.
Tab 3 has both of them up top.
Sorry, which one?
Oh yeah. Tab 3, and so workbook 1, tab 3 for cancer values. Just under that block, there's a bunch that, are PAHs corrected to index chemical reference, but there's a more recent publication for acrylonitrile, and then right below it, for 1-bromopropane, there's a more recent science. So, and I realized that would only mean something to you if I said this to you out loud, like I'm doing right now. So what this needs is a key where we say, what this phrase means elongated. But that is the difference between those two. When we say more recent science, we did actually check that that was the publication date of the critical study that value is based on, not the date of that the agency published their value.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, then I would suggest a bit of clarification of that.
Yeah, there's no way. It's not like you missed something. Like there's no way that you would know that unless you asked that question and I answered it. So.
But John, are you good? So what I hear you saying, David, so when it says correction to index chemical or more recent publication or more recent science, that you would have kind of a key that defines each of those terms of art. So you actually understood kind of what the reference was.
Yeah. I think that's missing. I mean, I know that it was Dana and I that were working on this together, and those were decisions we just sort of made I did want to make that distinction, and so we did that internally, make that distinction, but then we didn't think to explain it more or provide a key for that on the workbook. So I think that's something that we could add. That would probably add some value and wouldn't be very difficult.
Does that sound good, John?
It does.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for asking that. So again, going back, just high level feedback, concerns, errors as you reflect back on this process that we've had together, and then feedback around any specific toxic or air contaminant. Not or toxic air contaminant. Daisy?
Yeah. I just want to point out one thing. So in your, the three authority sources, their methodology is very similar. So, you're not going to, like have inconsistent within your choice. But when you include the TCEQ, when you don't have the value from authoritative source and you source to other agencies, then that's where, it deviates. Like I know TCEQ for port of entry effect, they adopted the EPS trees. I think John was, the author for that document. The RGDR for extrathoracic, the default is equals 1 instead of normalized by minimum ventilation divided by the surface area. So TCEQ was adopted, and we also adopted this, DAF, dosimetric adjustment factor. So when you kind of adopt like a use TCEQ value, then if it's a port of entry effect, you actually there's inconsistent. If you choose one or EHAS or ATSDR, or they are using the normalization based on the surface area for this particular port of entry effect. But TCEQ is not. So, but I look at your changed one. There's no case, at least in this one of a review. I didn't see a case you adopt the TCEQ that was a port of entry effect. So at least in this one, there's no inconsistent. But in the future, if you have some chemical, it happens to be, you adopt TCEQ and you adopt the DAF, then there's inconsistency within your methodology. So yeah, just in the future, maybe watch out, if you either continue use your own 3 sources or if you, use TCEQ. As far as I know, I think TCEQ and us was the only one adopted the RGDR extrathoracic equals 1. Yeah, we also have some like discussion there. Another thing is for your Excel sheet. I saw there's places the power sign was like linked together. So what you cannot tell if it's a power like a 20 like a 202. What you meant is a 20. There's like a power 2, but in the Excel sheet it was 202. So I don't know. Your Excel sheet was some notes like a, I saw you missing. Maybe added the power sign. So people know it's a power. It's kind of it's kind of like a create an error in the future when someone even know like go back to original document.
Is there, can you point to an example, Daisy?
Yeah, there's you can look at the workbook, I think a workbook 2, acrylic acid, and you look at the time adjustment notes. So that like a CNN, it should be power sign times T. And then, if you're missing the power sign, then the value just lumped together.
What tab are you on?
I'm on the tab 4.
Okay,
Non-cancer
thank
acute TRVs, and then acrylic acid,
Yeah.
and some adjustment notes. So your Haber's law CN times T, the N should be power sign, and then
Oh, yeah.
so I saw
see.
you're
see.
missing all the power sign. That's why kind of if you try to calculate, you
Yeah.
really do that.
Yeah. Thank you.
And go back to John's point, like most recent science, most recent evaluation. I think it's really good to clearly define this. Like I suggest before, if you have a column said you follow this rule, this link, then people very clear. Yeah, you just click, the rule, you choose what. I think that's all I have.
Good. Thank you, Daisy. And we'll just have everybody go around. So if you haven't, Susan, John V, John S, if you wanted to add, we'll just make sure everybody has a space to offer any final reflections. Yeah, John Vandenberg.
I was going back through my, I've been typing in my responses to the many questions that you've asked here. And if you go back to the very beginning document here, I guess that was document 1 with the overview. I would just like to say that I hope that our comments are more than just yes or no, because you do ask some questions that are yes, no questions, and then other ones you're asking for more of a view or perspective or comment about it. So that's what I'm kind of filling in now is more comments for you. So I just want to ask, in terms of the feedback from the group here to the state folks, what do you find to be most useful? You've heard a lot from us, but is it the written materials here that we'll send to you subsequently, or do you kind of have what you need, or some combination of those things?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It really, I feel like, will be a combination for me. Definitely we'll take everything we've heard here. We're gonna spend some time turning that into comprehensive minutes so we can remember everything, you know, down the road, during the rulemaking, after the rulemaking. We can remember all of these discussions and the nuances that we talked about. So definitely the meeting minutes are going to be pretty crucial, and we'll send those to you all for review after we've drafted those. But then also the written comments, I think, will help us kind of have a final summary of where you landed after, you know, hearing everyone's discussion and putting it in writing. So I think for me, in combination with the meeting minutes and your final written summaries here will give us kind of a comprehensive picture so that we can move this material forward through the rest of this rulemaking. So I see it as very helpful still to have comments in writing of where you landed at the end here.
And that then becomes part of the public record, the minutes, as well as the
Yes.
individual comments that we've got. Okay.
Right. So we'll compile all the written comments that you all send in, and those will be posted online alongside the minutes. So those will all be publicly available.
Okay. And then the Rules Committee and the Fiscal Committee are subsequent steps here. Just again, I guess to make sure that we're speaking to their views as well. Is there anything that you would like us to make sure that we're clear about in our comments for those two committees to make sure that they have the information they need to move this forward as you wish? I don't know who they are, so that's why I'm just I know who you guys are and I know your backgrounds, but not the Rules Committee and the Fiscal Committee. What are they looking for?
Yeah, JR, do you want to jump in?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, John. I think, you know, as we've discussed, there may be potential information we get from members submitted, members of the RAC. So the Rules Advisory Committee is going to be sort of a broad swath of community members. You know, it'll be members from industry, it'll be advocates from industry, it will be lawyers from industry. On the other side, it will be there's also advocates for, you know, community environment. There's going to be lawyers from community environment. And then there's also going to be other agencies, local health agencies and other folks who will be there. So I think what we anticipate is that we might get comments, on some of the toxicological, some specific items related to certain chemicals that some interested parties might have a lot of information on, because it's an interest to them. So if we get that information, I think we're going to be looking at it, and we're going to be reviewing that. And if we need to take that and bring that back to you all with some questions, either via email and then maybe a follow-up meeting, that's something we hope that, you know, you might be available for. I think everything that is in those worksheets will help us set up what we're going to take to the REC. I think that will give us everything we need. I think it will give us confidence to go to that RAC and say that we have really worked with you, we've gotten your feedback, and here it is. And then the RAC members themselves can see it as well as looking at as watching these videos. So I think we're okay. And the FAC, as we call it lovingly, is it's going to be the same members as the RAC. And, you know, a bigger portion of the RAC meeting that we're not discussing here is policy and implementation of our program and how these fit into that. So that's going to be a larger portion of the conversation with the RAC and the FAC. And I think, there will be technical discussion, but I think most of that will probably come in writing for us. So hopefully that's helpful.
Well, it is, and I guess I would say that would be, would welcome any request that you might have. I'd be happy to help provide a response to that if that's needed. And because there's so many chemicals, there's going to be a lot of interested parties out there. And so you may be finding some benefit from touching base with us again. And I'd be happy to help with that as needed. So.
I very much appreciate that. And I think that we probably will.
Okay. Okay.
Is it fair to say, oh, go on, John Vandenberg.
No, I was going to say otherwise, the only comment I would make is the general comment is that from the very beginning, I've been impressed by the amount of work that you all have put in. And I'm hopeful that the comments that we've provided don't become a barrier to you being able to consider the comments and move forward. We want to help. We don't want to just say, oh, we want to X, Y, and Z. That, in my own experience with advisory committees, oftentimes they want it to be tighter and shorter, and you've done a nice job having things be very precise, but oftentimes they want tight and short, and then more and more and more and more. So I hope that we have not given you this broad base, do more work, because I don't think that's really our intention. So at least that's not my intention. So, but otherwise, I'm impressed with the work you've done and pleased to help out. That's it for me.
Thanks, John Vandenberg. Yeah, I guess I was going to say, is it fair to say, I mean, because John, I think you started with, there are some yes/no questions. I think the yes/no questions were talked through in this environment. So I think to the extent, right, like, is the science behind PPR TV screening values sufficiently robust, ... Not just saying yes, right? Like,
That's
I think
right.
the conversation y'all had here is really helpful for those rulemaking to say not just yes, but yes, why? So DEQ, as part of that conversation, the rulemaking advisory is sitting on the science and the advisory work that y'all have done. Is that fair, JR?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for Holly and Dave, but I think that's yes. I would say, please write down, if it's a yes or no, just put everything you want us to know about any of the questions we've asked. It's your chance, and you can paint outside the lines to some degree if you want. So yeah, thanks for that, Ben.
Holly, anything different?
No, I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, David.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I really appreciated, I think it was day 5 where Holly set up kind of this framework of like 2 kind of categories of comments, like what things should we fix now before it moves on, and what things are like ideas to fix for the next time around, the next time we do the review. So if there is any kind of, I do think that in your written comments, that kind of categorization might be helpful. Like this one, like this comment this would be a good thing to do the next time you do the review, and this is one that you really should fix now before this number goes forward. If anything, that might be a helpful framework for us as you're writing up your comments.
Okay, I appreciate you reminding me about that, because I just made a note to myself to do exactly that. Very good point.
Awesome, thank you. Susan, John Stanek. Susan?
I don't have any other comments other than, ones that we've discussed throughout. I do want to thank all of you for the material that you put together, though. So it made going through a lot of information much more straightforward on our part.
Thank you, Susan. John Stanek, anything to add?
No, this was all very helpful. I've just been trying to take notes on what to focus on and how to highlight the strengths of all the work that's been done. What I might have missed, what sort of time frame are we looking for final review type stuff to be delivered?
Yes, let me pull that up. I had some dates. But I will say, let us know if you need more time. I want you to have time to do a good job on it, and however much time you want to spend on it. So let us know if you'd like more time. Was thinking though that sooner might be better in terms of not forgetting everything that we talked about, since we spent so much time thinking about it over the last 2 weeks. So I was thinking around end of day, Wednesday, March 5th would be a good target, but let us know if you need more time and we can send out an email with the dates for these.
Say March 5th. Okay, let's have any instant reaction.
Yeah, let us know.
I'm not seeing any instant reaction, but yeah, I think Holly,
Yeah.
bite and
Email
thumb
us.
as you think about and go through the sheets. If you need more time, just reach out to the team.
Yeah, and in the meantime, while you all are working on sending those in to us, we'll be working on those meeting minutes for your review. So we'll be working on that end.
Awesome.
And who do we send the comments back to?
Yes, so we will put that in an email to
Okay.
you all so you have it. But that will definitely be probably Dave and I.
Okay, that's fine.
But
Thank you.
I'll summarize all that.
I know, Holly, you got some next step slides, but I just want to pause to see before we get to that place and kind of formally close this part of the process. Any last thoughts for the good of the group?
I just want to thank everybody again on our team, but also all of the ATSAC members again, really. Thank you for your participating and bearing with us, as this was a little bit longer process than we anticipated. But I think we've benefited greatly from these conversations. So very appreciative. Thank you.
Thanks, JR. Okay, well, Holly, why don't you close us out with some next steps, and then we'll say goodbye and send everybody on their way.
Yeah, sounds good. This is the slide I looked at the last couple meetings, and we made it through the series of meetings 5, 6, and 7. And as we shared last time, we'll be in touch soon about scheduling meeting number 8. It's not scheduled yet. We're tentatively planning to have that scheduled sometime this May, so we'll reach out about that. But overall, as JR just said, thank you so much. We've been very excited after each one of these meetings, like trying to think about all the things we just learned and how to improve our process, and doing a lot of thinking about the next time we do this. This was really the first time we were doing this whole project, so we're really excited and really appreciate everything we heard from you all. And like I just mentioned, we'd appreciate your final answers to all the questions in document 3. We emailed you a Word version of that by end of day, Wednesday, March 5th. That will be sent to you in an email with contact information. Let us know if you need more time. And then I have one other topic to bring up with you all. We have one question that has come up on a specific TRV, the TRV for 1-methyl-naphthalene. And this came up in an email of state risk assessors that we're on, and thought we would like kind of a quick read from you all, if you all could take a look at that email. So we thought it'd be easiest just to forward you the email and ask you a specific question on it. So we were thinking to email that all out to all of you tomorrow, and then give you time to read through that after you've kind of put together all that written answers for us. So thinking we would give you like a month to take a look at that. So that'll be a separate email that we send out with a month to take a look and think about 1-methyl-naphthalene. And again, let us know if you'd like more time or have follow-up questions on that, but thought it would just be easiest to send you the email thread for background on it. But for anyone listening in on that topic, the email that we send out on that, the email thread, and then we'll also compile responses in a document that will all be publicly available and online as well. Are there any questions about that email request that we're planning on sending?
Not yet.
Okay, yeah, let us know once you get it, if anything comes up or you want to talk about it. we could make time in a future meeting. Just thought it'd be easiest to kick it off by you all taking a look at the email. So that's all of the notes I wrote down for myself to remember. Is there any other questions about next steps?
Holly, the one thing related to that meeting number 8 that will be on diesel, DPM, you will also see, the ATSAC members, you'll also get an email from us with a link and some instructions on how to access a file transfer site. We have access to provide you access to some of the peer-reviewed documents and some of the materials for review. So we'll be sending that as well. And in there, honestly, if you have issues accessing that site, just reach out to me directly because I can help you with that. It's set up through the DEQ, but that'll be something else that pops up with that meeting number 8.
I wanted to just say, just for also for the people listening, the purpose of that file transfer site is for documents that are like copyrighted, like journal articles that we can't just, like everything that we can just post on the DQ can just post on the website, we just will post on the website. But there are some like references to like peer-reviewed publications that are like behind a paywall that DQ can't just like post without breaking copyright law. So that's what the that's what that file is for just to give access to ATSAC members without like, yeah, breaking copyright rules.
Thanks.
Appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I
So
think- oh, Holly, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I threw a lot of dates at you and contact info. We'll summarize all this in an email and send it out.
Was there one last slide?
Just a thank you.
Yeah, thank you, slide.
Or
It
just-
also has
Yeah.
Apple's email and phone number, if you need some support, but there's Apple. That's it for today. So thanks, everybody, and just really appreciate being a part of this. And I know we've got some work to do in the background, but we'll see you in the next couple months. So really, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.